We also have Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan, who has been going through the bill for us, 142 pages, I hear. Sean, just how different is this bill from the House version? What are the big differences?
Well, what Senate Republicans were trying to do essentially was try to find a middle ground between the House bill and existing law. But the reality is a lot of this bill bears some resemblances to the House bill. It does curtail in the long term the spending that will go, the federal spending that will go to Medicaid. One thing that's different from the House bill is that it phases down the expansion of Medicaid that occurred under Obamacare at a more gradual rate than the House bill does. But there are a lot of similarities on the whole. This bill does go after a lot, most of the taxes in the Affordable Care Act, so that's very, very similar to the House bill. It goes after some of the regulations, some of the mandates. So this is a pretty forceful attempt to roll back key regulations in Obamacare. It doesn't go quite as aggressively against Obamacare as the House bill does. And that could worry some conservatives who want to get rid of as much of this as possible. But in a lot of ways, this is similar to the House bill. And I think, listening to Democrats there, you're going to hear a lot of the same arguments that Democrats were making when the House bill was making its way through that chamber earlier this year.
So what are going to be some of the key sticking points for conservatives like Rand Paul and Ted Cruz?
Yeah, so when you talk to Ted Cruz, he's somebody who's really, really worried about the regulations, the regulatory framework in Obamacare. As we go through this bill, it remains to be seen whether enough of these regulations have been pared back to get the support of somebody like Ted Cruz or Rand Paul. Rand Paul, talking to him yesterday, said, look, I want to repeal the whole thing. And when he talked about some of the emerging principles he saw in this draft, he called them Obamacare light. He said this is basically, a version of Obamacare. So that's pretty strong criticism coming from a conservative there. So it remains to be seen whether, when they look at the details today, they'll be happier about where this bill is or whether they'll be more upset. The reality is Mitch McConnell can only lose 2 Republicans and still pass this bill. Republicans only have a 52-48 advantage over Democrats, so they need 50 votes, and they need Mike Pence to break a tie if they do get 50 votes. At this point in time, it is far from a sure bet that McConnell is going to get those 50 votes. It's not even clear yet that we're going to get a vote on the floor next week. That's what McConnell wants. That's what he's aiming for. But the reality is if he's 4, 5, 6 votes short, there's a possibility he just pulls this thing. Republicans move on going into the 4th of July recess.
Could there be an issue like when the House bill was going through debate before they passed that? The big thing was pre-existing conditions. Is there something in this bill that could sway people in favor of it? Enough people in favor of it?
Yeah, I think when McConnell crafted this, one of the big things he underscored to Republicans is that we are going to protect the pre-existing condition protections that were created under Obamacare, and I think he's firmly committed to doing that. But you have a balance here, right? On the other side, you're going to have conservatives saying, well, why are we, maintaining some of these regulations? Why are we not just why are we not just getting rid of this, with the full force of the law? So there's a real kind of balancing act that he has to do. And he has said he wants to protect pre-existing conditions, and that, I think, will satisfy some centrist Republicans who are worried about going too far in attacking this bill. But again, on the other side, you risk alienating people like Ted Cruz, like Rand Paul, like Mike Lee. It's a really difficult balancing act for McConnell. It may be an impossible one in the end, but we'll have to wait and see over the next week.
And what about the moderates in the party? People like senators like Susan Collins and Rob Portman. What issues might they have?
Well, a couple of things. Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski from Alaska are you can expect to hear them express concerns about the fact that this bill and this effort seeks to remove funding from, federal funding at least, from Planned Parenthood. So that's an issue that needs to be resolved off the bat. When you look at Republican senators from states that expanded Medicaid, so people like Rob Portman, Shelley Moore Capito, they may not be happy with this compromise bill. They wanted to see an even longer, more gradual phase down to Medicaid expansion. So this might not make them happy. And they sought a fund, Portman and Capito did, a $45 billion fund to treat opioid addiction in their states, which is a big issue and a big problem there. They didn't get that in this bill, and that might anger them. Now, Republicans and Democrats will have a chance to offer amendments to this bill on the floor next week, so we'll see if they're able to add some things to this bill that make it better for them. But right now, there's a lot of stuff in here that will make a lot of different Republicans angry for a lot of different reasons.
Did anything stay the same?
Same as the House bill? Or?
Yes.
Well, I think when you look at the overall approach, I mean, it basically is a similar approach in that, it goes after many of the taxes, and Obamacare goes after many of the mandates. It treats the individual and employer mandate the same as the House bill did. Effectively, the House bill sought to pare back those amendments, and the Senate bill does the same thing. McConnell underscored that on the Senate floor. The big thing we're going to want to see is when the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan budget agency, comes out with their score on this bill. What is it going to say? Because when we saw a score on the House bill, it said tens of millions of people stood to lose insurance coverage as compared to current law over the next decade. So what are we going to see in this CBO report? Is it going to say a similar number? Is that number going to be smaller? That's the real thing to watch for next week in trying to sort out the differences between the House and the Senate bill. Because Republicans can say, look, this bill protects more people, keeps more people insured than the House bill. That might convince some moderate Republicans to support it. If it goes even further, if even more people stand to lose insurance coverage, McConnell's got a really, really big problem on his hands next week.
So, Sean, how bad, how damaging could a bad CBO score be for senators as they prepare to vote and then head home to their districts for recess?
It could be very damaging. It could really, really make them think twice about voting for this bill. I think a lot of Republicans are frankly afraid of what that is going to show in terms of the impact on insurance coverage, in terms of the impact on people losing their health care, because they know this is a thing that could haunt them not just this year, not even just next year in next year's midterms, but potentially in 2020, 2022. They look back at what happened with Obamacare and they see a lot of Democrats who voted for Obamacare who suffered politically years down the road, 2012, 2014, 2016. They saw the negative ads that the opposition ran against the Democrats, and I think they're worried that the same thing will happen to them. And when you look at the CBO report, you're going to have some very, very specific numbers, and again, numbers that are going to come from a nonpartisan agency that is going to be really, really easy for the opposition to point to and say, you are taking away insurance from X amount of people over X amount of years. And it's going to be very, very hard for them to rebut that argument. A lot of them don't want to deal with that. So I think it's a really big concern next week for Senate Republicans. What does this CBO bill show? And really, that could be pivotal in deciding whether McConnell can get the 50 votes or whether he has to kind of fold this thing up and move on.
We will have to wait and see. Sean Sullivan of the Washington Post, thank you so much for joining us and breaking a part of this down for us. Appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.